The system running your attention right now was designed by people who studied something that predates every university on Earth. What if the most powerful education system in history never had a campus? There's a question that serious historians avoid because it doesn't fit the standard narrative of intellectual progress. If the university system was built to democratize knowledge, why did the people who built it keep a separate curriculum for themselves? Not a metaphor, a literal, documented, parallel system of education that ran alongside and in many cases above every formal institution of learning in the Western world for centuries. It had no campus, no degree, no public enrollment, and it produced, with unusual consistency, the people who designed the laws, the cities, the financial systems, and the symbolic architecture of modern civilization. That system had a name. Several, actually, depending on the century and the country. But the most documented version, the one with the most verifiable historical record in the English-speaking world, formalized itself in London in 1717. What it taught wasn't what its critics claimed. It wasn't devil worship. It wasn't conspiracy. It was something far more unsettling to anyone who thinks about power seriously. It taught pattern recognition as a discipline. The ability to see the structure beneath an event, not the event itself, but the logic that made the event possible and predictable. It taught symbolic communication, how to encode meaning in architecture, in language, in ritual, so that the message reaches the people it's meant for and slides past everyone else. And it taught the construction of loyalty networks that operate on something deeper than self-interest, networks built on shared initiation, shared symbol, shared commitment to a framework that only members fully understand. That last part is the piece that almost no one thinks through completely. A contract creates obligation. A salary creates dependence. But a shared initiation creates identity. And identity is the most durable form of loyalty that exists. It doesn't require enforcement. It doesn't expire. It survives failure, conflict, and the collapse of institutions. Here's what almost no one notices. Every major organization that has shaped Western civilization over the past 3 centuries, financial, political, architectural, ecclesiastical, has at its founding layer a documented network of men who shared exactly this kind of initiation-based identity, not conspiracy. Convergence. The question isn't whether these men coordinated. The question is what they knew that produced that convergence, and whether that knowledge is still operating in the systems you interact with every day. The answer changes how you read power, not theoretically, functionally. How a curriculum designed for builders became the blueprint for modern influence. The official story is that Freemasonry was a guild. Stonemasons who built cathedrals, who needed to identify each other across different regions, who developed handshakes and passwords for practical reasons. That's true. And it's also incomplete in a way that obscures what actually matters. The cathedral builders who formalized this system weren't just tradesmen with secret passwords. They were applied geometricians. They understood something about proportion, about sacred measurement, about the relationship between physical space and psychological state that most modern architects have completely lost. A cathedral isn't just a large building. It's a machine for producing a specific cognitive and emotional experience in the person who walks into it. The proportions aren't aesthetic choices. They're calculated ratios that have measurable effects on attention, on the sense of scale, on the body's felt relationship to the space around it. This was understood and applied with precision by the builders. And when those builders formalized their knowledge into a transmissible system, they encoded that understanding into the structure of the initiation itself. You don't just learn about the geometry, you experience it. The ritual creates the same cognitive shift that the cathedral creates, a reorganization of how you perceive your own position within a larger structure. That's not mysticism. That's applied cognitive architecture. One of the most documented names in the intellectual lineage connecting Renaissance Hermeticism to the formal Masonic system is Francis Bacon. Philosopher, statesman, and deep student of Hermetic traditions, Bacon argued in published texts in the early 17th century that knowledge about nature and human behavior should be organized into graduated systems of access, not democratized, but stratified by demonstrated readiness. That architecture of layered knowledge is precisely what the Masonic degree system formalized decades after his death. The line between Bacon's vision of organized knowledge and the initiatic structure of the 1717 Grand Lodge is not speculative. It is documented in the intellectual history of the period. Wait, what does this have to do with 2025? Everything. The most influential communication systems in the modern world, advertising, political messaging, digital platform design, operate on exactly this principle. They don't present arguments for evaluation. They construct environments that reorganize perception before any conscious evaluation begins. The decision about what seems normal, what seems aspirational, what seems threatening. These are architectural decisions, and they're made upstream of awareness. This is applied occult knowledge in modern life. Not the dramatic version, the functional version, the version that shapes what you want before you know you want it. The documented curriculum of Masonic initiation, available in historical records, lodge proceedings, and the writings of initiates who published their experiences, describes this mechanism with the clarity that most modern texts on influence don't match. What you learn in the first 3 degrees isn't a set of beliefs, it's a set of perceptual tools. How to read a room, how to identify who holds actual authority versus formal title, how to communicate in layers, one message for the surface, another for those who know what to look for. Drop a comment if this is landing differently than you expected. You might already be thinking in ways that the system was designed to produce. There's one more layer to this curriculum that changes everything about how you read the organizations that shape modern life. Why? The logic of initiation never left. It just changed its language. Here's something no one tells you in any course on business, politics, or media. The intellectual frameworks that dominate Western institutional life, organizational theory, brand strategy, political communication, financial architecture, were not developed from scratch in the 20th century. They were translated. Concepts that existed in initiatic form for centuries were stripped of their ritual language and repackaged in secular, academic vocabulary. That translation made them invisible, and invisible tools are the most powerful tools. Consider what corporate culture actually is, when you describe its mechanics without the corporate language. A shared set of symbols and rituals that creates group identity stronger than formal contract. A system of initiation, onboarding, performance reviews, promotion ceremonies that progressively deepens commitment and filters out those who don't fully internalize the framework. A hierarchical structure where information is distributed by level, not by relevance, and where access to deeper knowledge is tied to demonstrated loyalty. That is not a description of a modern company. That is a description of a lodge operating at industrial scale. The people who built the first truly modern corporations in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the railroads, the banks, the early media companies, were in significant numbers documented members of initiatic orders, not as a coincidence, because the organizational technology they were applying had been refined in those orders for generations. Stop here for a moment. What they did was translate the architecture without crediting the source. The result is a world in which the invisible symbolic control over human decisions operates everywhere, in companies, in governments, in media, in digital platforms, but is never identified as what it actually is. That's not a claim about intent. It's an observation about inheritance. Arcane secrets decoded through pattern recognition isn't a dramatic concept when you understand what pattern recognition actually means in this context. It means seeing the organizational DNA of an institution, the specific way it constructs loyalty, distributes information, and uses symbolic commitment to bind its members, and recognizing that DNA as something older than the institution itself. Something that was refined over centuries before anyone thought to remove its original name. What modern institutions call culture, strategy, and leadership was called something else for 400 years before anyone thought to rename it. And the renaming was not accidental. It was the final step in making the mechanism invisible to the people it operates on. If this is reorganizing something in how you read the systems around you, The like matters here. It's the signal that tells the algorithm this kind of investigation has an audience. It keeps this work running, because what comes next is the part that connects all of this to something you interact with every single day, without recognizing what you're looking at. How the hidden architecture of knowledge became the infrastructure of attention. There's a document that circulated in Silicon Valley in early years of the social media industry. Not secret. Published. Cited in academic papers on persuasive technology. It described the design principles for systems that could reliably hold human attention over sustained periods of time. The language was behavioral psychology. The mechanics were reward loops, variable reinforcement schedules, social validation signals. Read it again with different eyes. Variable reinforcement, the principle that unpredictable rewards create stronger behavioral attachment than predictable ones, appears as a structural principle in esoteric initiatic texts centuries before B. Pfeffer. Skinner formalized it as laboratory psychology. Historians of ideas have documented this convergence across multiple traditions, from Hermetic training systems to Kabbalistic practice structures, each using graduated revelation and unpredictable symbolic reward to deepen commitment and maintain engagement. The specific use of social validation as a mechanism for anchoring identity to a system appears in Masonic and Rosicrucian texts as early as the 17th century. The architecture of progressive disclosure, where deeper knowledge is unlocked through demonstrated loyalty, is the structural logic of every initiatic system in Western history. It is also the structural logic of every major digital platform operating today. This is not a coincidence. That's a pattern. The people who built these platforms studied cognitive science, behavioral economics, and the history of persuasion systems with a depth that most users of those platforms have no frame of reference for. Some of them, in documented interviews, explicitly reference the study of cult dynamics, high-demand organizations, and initiation systems as part of the intellectual background for their design decisions. Hidden power in visible structures doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It operates through the assumption that what you're looking at is neutral infrastructure, a feed, a recommendation, a notification. The architecture disappears into its function. What the initiatic tradition preserved, and what scholars of Western esotericism describe as conscious witchcraft, meaning the deliberate application of symbolic systems to produce measurable shifts in perception and behavior, a practice documented across Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and ceremonial magic traditions as a technology of directed attention rather than a supernatural claim, is precisely the understanding that the most durable systems of influence are the ones that feel like the natural environment, not a cage you can see and therefore push against, a landscape that shapes your movement without ever appearing to constrain it. These interpretations appear across centuries and cultures, consistently studied as symbolic systems rather than literal supernatural claims, and their structural logic is what survived the translation into secular institutional language. The curriculum that was never in any university didn't disappear. It was translated, scaled, and embedded into the systems that now organize the attention of billions of people simultaneously. The question isn't whether this is happening. The question is what you do with the recognition that it is. If you want to follow where this investigation goes next, subscribe and turn on notifications. What comes after? This isn't a continuation of the same thread. It's a layer below it. The specific mechanisms, the documented cases, the names and systems that most people never connect to this history. The architecture only controls the movement of those who can't see the structure. You just started seeing it.